when we talk about funding schools, I think it's important to keep in mind we have a growing student population, we have a changing student population, we have a population of kids with more needs, and we're trying to raise standards. Our objective in Texas is for all kids to come out of high school with post-secondary readiness. We are at a real crossroads in the state of Texas. We have passed some very significant milestones in the last year or two, and sometime during this next 2-year period, during the biennium that's going to be funded by the 82nd Legislature, I expect that we will pass some more very significant milestones. And just as an example, last year in the 09-010 school year, for the first time in Texas, over half of our kids applied for and received free and reduced price lunch and breakfast. We have a higher percentage that's eligible, but we actually had over half of our kids apply and receive. That tells us more of our kids are coming from needier homes. 2 milestones that I expect us to pass in this coming 2-year period. Sometime during this 2-year period, we are going to have over 5 million kids enrolled in the schools of the state of Texas. We're growing at about 84,000 students a year, and we currently have a little over 4.8 million kids in our schools. I think we're going to pass 5 million in this biennium. A second milestone I expect us to pass within this next 2-year period. Sometime during this biennium, an absolute majority of all children enrolled in our Texas public schools will be Hispanic. The Hispanic student group has been the largest disaggregated student group if you just break our population down for probably the last 4 or 5 years. But sometime during this coming biennium, that population will be our absolute majority. That's where nearly all of our growth is. The 82nd Legislature, which convenes on January the 11th of 2011, is facing, in my opinion, one of the most serious budget shortfalls that we've ever experienced in Texas. Estimates range anywhere from 18 or 19 billion to 25 billion. And we're constitutionally obligated to close that gap. We cannot fund a deficit at the state level in Texas. So one way or the other, we have to close that gap. And there's a lot of discussion, and I think a general expectation in Austin that a significant portion of that reduction is going to occur by reducing funding for education. So at the same time that we're growing, at the same time that we're changing, at the same time that we're raising standards, we're going to try to do it for a whole lot less money. Mm-hmm. And frankly, that's going to be very difficult. Some of the preliminary discussions are that the reductions in public education are likely to be somewhere between $3 billion and $6 billion over a 2-year biennium. And that's a big number, and sometimes it's hard to get our arms around just a big number like that. But if you start to break it down and try to think about how do we analyze that and approach that, I kind of divide it into 3 buckets. First bucket is what can we postpone? What can we simply defer from this biennium to a future point in time when hopefully the economy is somewhat better? Second is to look at all of the grants and allotments that are outside of the foundation school program, and those in total are nearly $2 billion over a biennium. And then the third is to actually cut the foundation school program itself, and of course that's the heart of the funding for schools in Texas. That's what pays for teachers, that's what pays for curriculum materials, that's what pays for fuel for buses, that's what pays for utility bills and basic maintenance on buildings. So that really goes to the heart of our educational enterprise in Texas. I think it is likely in bucket number 1, things that can be deferred. I think it's likely that the August 2013 foundation school program payment will simply be pushed into September. And I expect the state to look at this not only in public education but in other areas of the budget, sort of like deferring a credit card payment from one month to the next month. And so funds management approaches to move things out of this biennium into a future biennium, I expect to be a big part of the discussion. And definitely, I think the August 2013 payment and possibly even the July 2013 payment could be deferred to schools. That is probably less painful than some other areas of cuts, and I think will probably be looked at first. The second is all of the grants and allotments outside of the foundation school program. Some of these go to all districts. Some of them go to just those districts that apply for and receive particular grants. But they include things like full-day pre-K expansion grants or the district allotments that are used for performance pay and incentives to teachers, or funding for textbooks and instructional materials. Or the technology allotment that districts use to invest in computers for kids and things of that nature, or science lab grants as we're trying to teach more science courses to have the spaces that are properly equipped to do that. There are a variety of these grants and allotments that I think are at risk, and all total they are around $2 billion. And I think that reductions in this area could be as much as $1 billion when the dust settles over the biennium. And then the third and the most difficult area to make reductions is in the foundation school program itself, which again is the very heart of funding for schools, and that's that bucket 3. We have no experience doing this in Texas. We are truly in sort of uncharted territory in the modern post-World War II era. Do you make reductions proportionally so that wealthier districts lose more money than poorer districts? Do you make reductions across the board? These are all unanswered questions, and I think will be very difficult decisions, and probably I would say reducing the foundation school program, if we come to that point, will be the single hardest decision the 82nd legislature has to make. I think it is very likely that the deferrals will take place. I think it is very likely that there will be significant cuts in the grants and allotments outside of the foundation school program, and I would say the odds in my view are slightly better than 50-50 that we will make cuts in the foundation school program itself. And this will translate into teacher positions. It will translate into direct services for kids. These are reductions that will be felt by students and parents. We do spend a lot of money on public education in Texas. Over a 2-year period, Texas will spend all total on all aspects of public education somewhere around $40 billion of state money. But remember, we're growing at 84,000 students, and we're going to have over 5 million kids by the end of this biennium. It's a big number, and I think there's a natural feeling when you look at a big abstract number to think there must be some room for reduction in there. And there probably are areas where we can make reductions in funding that don't permanently harm or damage direct services to kids. I think that is the key point, is finding the point where there are legitimate cutbacks that can be made in public ed just in light of the overall state of the economy, and differentiating those from cuts that are actually going to harm services to kids at the very time that we're trying to raise standards in Texas. And I think that's a discussion that will naturally evolve over the session. We'll start off thinking about big abstract numbers, and as we move through the session and the appropriations process and begin to talk about specific programs, it's going to be very important for educators and parents and taxpayers and business leaders that are depending on schools to produce qualified graduates to weigh in on some of those cuts that have the potential to affect services to kids.